Hello everybody and welcome back to the ASUS PCDIY YouTube channel. This is JJ once again and we're bringing you guys another motherboard overview. This time around we're going to be talking about AMD's 990FX based chipset. Now we've had a number of different 990FX boards released since the actual chipsets launched. Specifically we're going to be talking about the M5A99FX Pro R2.0. This is actually from our mainstream series of motherboards, which is a great board for pretty much all types of usage model, whether it's going to be gaming, content creation, general productivity, or any number of other different types of usages that you guys are looking for if you're centering around an AMD FX-based CPU. So as always in this type of overview, we're going to be talking about a lot of different aspects, including performance, features and functionality, special design implementations, and how that all comes together to be able to give you guys a great platform for building. Now, we're also going to cover aspects of actual storage performance, as well as also overclocking expectations, whether they relate to the actual scaling that you could achieve on the platform, as well as the expectations for stability that you would have on this type of motherboard. Now, before we go ahead and jump into all that, we want to go ahead and talk a bit more about understanding where the 990FX chipset sits in relation to the other 9 series chipsets that are available from AMD, as well as also how they compare against the other motherboard offerings that we offer that support FX-based CPUs. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Okay, so diving deeper into the actual specifications and the positioning for the M5A99FX Pro R2.0, let's go ahead and paint the picture in terms of what other chipsets we have. We have the 990FX chipset, we also have the 990X chipset, and then we have the 970 chipset. Those are the 3 chipsets that comprise to be able to release motherboards that all support FX-based CPUs. So those would all be compatible on the AM3 Plus CPU socket or the Vishira CPUs. So anything like a AMD FX 6300, and 8350, any one of the 9000 series CPUs, those would all be compatible on any one of those 3 motherboards. Now, when you talk about specifically ASUS's M5A series, such as the M5A97 R2.0 or the M5A990FX Pro R2.0, or in the middle of the road, the M5A990X Evo R2.0, the R2.0 is going to designate that they're all designed from the ground up for that 2nd generation refresh, so designed for the Vishira series of FX-based CPUs. Now, in terms of the overall quality, the stability, the interoperability, it's going to be consistent across all those boards. They've had a great deal of maturity and fine-tuning within the UEFI, great DRAM overclocking, great stability, great interoperability and performance tuning for the FX CPUs, and even things like the fundamental overclocking experience is going to be consistent across all the boards. So whether you're talking about that entry-level 970 or that 990X or this one, the 990FX chipset, you're going to get a comparable OC experience across all of them. Whether that's an FX 6300 at 4.6, 4.7, or 4.8 gigahertz, that's not going to be an issue. Or you could drop in an 8350 and also be able to comfortably hit 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz. Now, the 990X and the 990FX chipset are going to be a little bit better solutions to consider if you really want to drive the 8300 series of CPUs higher and faster, especially than 4.6 gigahertz. Now, that is definitely possible on the 970 chipset, and as actually we've shown in our build guide with the M5A97 R2.0, that board is no slouch when it comes to overclocking, with a great deal of reliability and consistency even on those higher end FX-based CPUs. The main differential is going to be in the VRM solution. So this section right here is going to be a little bit more advanced and it's going to be more robust, not only giving you better thermal dissipation, which is important because of the load that will be put onto that section, especially when overclocking, but also the components as a whole are better distributed to be able to handle those much higher power draw requirements for those overclock CPU configurations. So if you're looking to heavily overclock, those 2 platforms are going to be a little bit better, but overall in terms of that stability and the max frequency that you're looking to reach, as long as you have solid airflow in the system and you've got a CPU that has the margin within it and a solid cooling solution, you can readily overclock comfortably on any one of those boards. But when we talk about that differential point, that's where you're going to see some of the difference, is that in the 990X and 990FX, they're going to feature more advanced VRM designs and heatsink solutions that give you better thermal efficiency, better thermal dissipation, and potentially a little bit better stability at those higher frequencies that demand higher end load. Now, are there technical differentiations between the chipsets? There are, but they're going to be kind of minimal, and really depending on your usage experience, you might not even know that there's really a large difference. The 990X chipset as well as the 990FX chipset support actually a faster operating hypertransport bus, operating at 5.2 gigatransfers versus the 970 chipset, which only operates at 4.8 gigatransfers. Now, what does that actually really mean in real-world performance? Actually, very little. In most situations, this is only going to minimally impact frame rate to a small degree, a little bit of DRAM efficiency, PCI Express efficiency, but as a whole, it's really not going to change a large outcome when you talk about your actual numbers that you're going to see in real world experience, whether it's in applications or whether it's in games. But in that respect, the 970 chipset is slightly lower than the 990X and the 990FX based chipset. Now for other aspects such as, let's say, SATA port connectivity, all the boards are the same. They all feature SATA 6G across all the ports, but some of the ports may be, of course, enhanced, such as a 990FX chipset, and might have more supplemental SATA ports than offered by default what comes with the chipset. Now the 990FX chipset, the 990X, and the 970 chipset, none of them offer USB 3, but ASUS has integrated USB 3 support on all three of those motherboards, so you get that as a plus. So outside of that, really the only other differential is going to be in the PCI Express lanes. As you see right here, this board features a number of PCI Express slots on it, and it's designed from the ground up for SLI, for Crossfire, for a lot of expansion support for you guys that are interested in adding in a lot of cards to your system. Now the 990X chipset will also offer Crossfire and SLI and has a good number of PCI Express lanes, but is limited to by 8 by operation versus the FX chipset, which is designed for by 16 by 16 operation. The 970 chipset actually does not support SLI, as the requirement for SLI has to be by 8 by 8, but it does support Crossfire, but it will operate the secondary Crossfire card in a by 4 configuration. Now that actually will still let you enough bandwidth to actually have a considerable increase in performance. So for you guys that are really interested in running Crossfire, it is an option, but generally if you're considering 2 GPUs, you might be better off served by either the 990X chipset or the 990FX chipset. So as a whole, that gives you a little bit more insight in understanding what might be the differentials between the 970, the 990X, and then the 990FX based chipset. So what about some of the differences when it comes to ASUS's motherboards that are all on the same chipset? Well, ASUS offers 3 motherboards that are all on the 990FX chipset. This board right here, the M5A99FX Pro R2.0. We also offer our Sabertooth 990FX R2.0, and then we also offer the Crosshair Formula Z. Now, all 3 of those boards all feature the same exact chipset. So where is really the differential going to be? All of them are fantastic in terms of the overall overclocking capability, their stability, the interoperability, the performance for the system. They all feature actually very similar advanced features like USB 3 boost, as well as a class-leading UEFI to give you a lot of tuning options. They all feature digital controllers for the actual VRM assembly and for the DRAM to be able to give you extensive tweaking and tuning controls inside there for overclocking or for tuning for efficiency. So the differential actually is going to come into some of the specialized features. On our actual TUF series of motherboards, the focus is at advanced cooling and monitoring, along with more advanced premium components. So that's what you're going to get on the Sabertooth series of motherboards. It's a fantastic board for overclocking, and it's going to generally offer great stability, no issues, and also give you the benefit of a 5-year warranty. But it's really focused at the users that, one, want the thermal radar technology that gives you multiple sensors on there for real-time temperature mapping, as well as maybe more advanced fan controls, along with those premium upgraded TUF components that are featured on the motherboard. Now the Crosshair Formula Z is in a whole nother bracket, as it falls under our ROG series of motherboards. It is the best of the best that we produce for the AMD based chipset of motherboards. If you're looking for the absolute best board when it comes to DRAM overclocking, CPU overclocking, the highest end VRM components that we offer, as well as the most advanced features and functions that are catered towards tweakers, tuners, and gamers, that's going to be on the Crosshair series. But in that respect, the M5A board doesn't compromise heavily. It's a fantastic board that gives you a great deal of connectivity, high-end VRM design, premium quality components, as well as advanced features and functions, whether it's going to be in the fan controls, whether it's going to be in the actual direct key functions, or in a number of other functions that are built in here that we're going to go more into when we talk about the actual topology, the connectivity, and the features of this motherboard. So you can really feel confident that if you don't want to jump over to either one of those two, you're not really going to be compromising to a large degree. It really just comes down to the features and functions that you're interested within. So let's go ahead and keep moving this along. Okay guys, so here we've got our M5A99FX Pro R2.0, and we're just going to go ahead and give you a little bit of an overview regarding kind of the general topology and some of the key features. So we're going to break this down into a couple of different ways. We'll first go ahead and go over the first general lines of the overall topology and connectivity that we have on the board. Then we'll focus a bit more on kind of some of the specialized power delivery implementation aspects, as well as some of the premium components. And then we'll round that out, of course, with the I/O connectivity, and then we'll talk a bit about the kind of special features and functionality that the board might have to offer. So first up, when we go ahead and take a look at the board here, of course we can see that we've got a large finned heatsink assembly, and that helps us to go ahead and help to keep the primary VRM components such as the MOSFETs, which are underneath here, nice and cool, and helps to ensure better thermal dissipation and overall stability, especially as we're looking to overclock the platform. That's a key area, especially that you might see a little bit more of a differential between, let's say, 990FX boards and then 990X and 970 base boards. And of course here we have a secondary heatsink assembly which goes over the actual North Bridge kind of configuration for the FX-based chipset, which can be important when you're helping to drive hypertransport bus as well as memory frequencies higher up. Now from that, of course, we see that we've got 4 DIMMs, and that's fully supported as this platform supports dual channel operation. Now one of the key features you're already going to see right off the bat is going to be right here in terms that you see that you have latches on the top of the memory, but on the bottom you don't, and that's referred to as our QDIMM based implementation, which allows you to go ahead and just move one latch and then go ahead and remove the memory, as opposed to having to move 2 latches. So it makes the actual insertion and removal process a bit easier. Now one thing you're going to see right there is I went ahead and I pulled out actually some AMD based memory. A lot of you guys might be purchasing memory that's XMP based, but keep in mind that actually AMD does have memory that they've worked with partners on that is AMD directly validated. The difference is going to be is that this memory is called AMP based. So AMD memory profile versus XMP, which is extreme memory profile, which are designed and qualified for Intel based processors. Now our motherboard does have a feature within its UEFI which is designed to give you guys interoperability and compatibility and performance for Intel based memory modules, so that you can go in and you can select an option called DOCP, which will allow you to take those memory modules and run an XMP based profile. But for optimal general paired efficiency and for guaranteed compatibility, you generally do want to look at AMD-based profile memory kits if you want to have the best consistent experience. But XMP or AMP, either which route, is not going to be an issue in terms of running here on the board. Now if we take a look directly below, we're going to see that we've got quite a bit of expansion. We've got a primary by 16, a by 1, then another by 16, another by 16, a PCI Express, and a by 16 base slot. Now in terms of the actual electrical signaling that we have here on the board, it is pretty straightforward in terms of the connectivity that we're going to have. So you're going to have, as we can actually see listed out right here, we're going to have a dual by 16 and by 16 base configuration. The black will run actually at a by 4 base link, and of course the by 1 slot is pretty straightforward in terms of being a by 1 base connection. Now in terms of our fan connectivity, we have 1 fan header, 2 fan headers, 3 fan headers, 4 and 5 fan headers. We still maintain our Fan Expert fan control functionality on this motherboard, meaning that you have the ability to go ahead and set manual fan controls, whether it's in the UEFI or in the operating system, for this motherboard. The great thing about that is that we can then support controlling either 3-pin base fans or 4-pin base fans on any one of the chassis fan headers. For the primary CPU fan headers, those will only control 4-pin base fans or PWM base fans, so you do want to go ahead and keep that in mind. Now, rounding out from there, you're going to see that we've got some additional connectivity here on the board. So of course, on this side, we've got our primary 24-pin power connection. Directly below that, we have a front USB 3 header. Now this does actually work with our USB 3 technology, meaning that we have a specialized hardware IC that has firmware on there that allows us to enable what's called USB 3 boost, and that allows us to go ahead and improve the performance for flash-based storage devices that are connected, giving you overall better performance, especially if you're looking at either Windows 7 or Windows 8. You can use our AI Suite software to go ahead and quickly enable that. Now here you've got one serial ATA port, and then you've got 6 more directly below that. So you got a lot of storage expansion capabilities available to you there. Now directly below that here at the bottom, we've got of course all your standard fare of connections. So we have the front HD audio connection. We have our USB BIOS flashback button, which we'll talk a bit more about when we take a look at the back I/O. We've then have directly next to that a TPM header. We have 1, 2, 3 USB 2 front headers for your chassis. We then have here a serial COM port header, and then right here we have a direct key button. If you press this direct key button, this will actually directly reboot your system straight into the UEFI, so you don't have to worry about pushing the delete key on your system. And then directly from there, we have of course all the corresponding front leads for things like your power, your reset, your power LED, hard drive LED, things like that. Now directly above that, there's a small little header that actually has a cool level of functionality. This key will actually conserve the same function as the direct key button. Now once you put this motherboard inside the chassis, this button doesn't really serve you any purpose. But if you go ahead and run your reset lead to this DRCT header, it will work the same as this button with your reset button on your chassis. So if you ever press the reset button on your chassis, it'll reboot you straight into the UEFI. So that's a nice little additional touch there. Now if we float all the way up here to the top of the motherboard, we've got a MemOK button, which is great. In some situations, whether you're overclocking aggressively and maybe you have an issue in relation to the voltage or frequency that you're running, or maybe you have a DIMM that's going faulty on you, such as a situation maybe you have to move one DIMM out, any number of variable situations, you can use the MemOK to either troubleshoot memory compatibility or memory initialization issues, whether it's a new memory kit or whether maybe it's one that's failing, as well as also using this like a semi-clear CMOS, where it won't reset all the parameters of your board, but just reset the frequency and voltage parameters that you have on the motherboard. So it's a really nice feature that we offer there. Now, moving along, what else you're going to see is down here, of course, we have our Realtek HD audio chip, and this is the Realtek 892 high definition audio chip, which is very solid quality based design. We've got a lot of soothing capacitors down here, which help to minimize the noise output that you would get from that Realtek HD audio. Now, in addition to that, it does support our DTS Ultra 2 PC software package, meaning that you have DTS Connect support. So for you guys that want to be able to have multi-channel re-encoding digitally output, that is fully supported as part of the sound specification chipset. And then from there, of course, here rounding it out at the top, we've got our 8-pin CPU power connection, making sure that we get more than enough power to the board. Now, if we take a look at the power topology, we want to go into a little bit more that this board has to offer. So let's go ahead and lay it down flat and take a closer look at the VRM. Okay guys, so we've gone ahead and taken the heatsink assembly off and just gone ahead and given you guys a closer look to the VRM and the primary power topology that we want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about. So first off, you can see it features our dual intelligent processors, which essentially means that we've not only got a digital control implementation on this motherboard, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but also that it's got our TPU and EPU hardware ICs that are on here that give you some more advanced monitoring and control parameters available not only within the UEFI but within the operating system. Now if we go ahead and shift over right here, you're going to see that you've got a sintered heat pipe that goes directly into this finned heatsink assembly, and that's great because that makes contact with the MOSFETs, which is the hottest running part of the motherboard, to help to go ahead and give us strong thermal dissipation abilities, especially as we put the motherboard underneath load as we're overclocking it. Now, directly below that primary heatsink, you can see right there that we've got this really nice row of high quality inductors. Now these inductors are what's referred to as chokes, are the phase power that's on the motherboard. So you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's a very capable high performance. It's actually the same type of 8-phase array that we feature on our Crosshair Formula Z series motherboard. So it's very competent in terms of giving you a very high class. Keep in mind that the Crosshair Formula really has been consistently setting the highest level overclocks in world record performance, and the M5A takes on that lineage of high quality power delivery, which is a little bit below the Crosshair Formula Z, but it's still an amazing board and is going to be able to push any one of those FX series CPUs with a great deal of efficiency, reliability, and consistency, and no problems when it comes to the overall power quality. Now, another thing to keep in mind with these inductors is that these are referred to as what are called fully molded, which means that the actual inductor internally, it's not hollow. It's been fully formed to be able to go ahead and minimize DC loss, low copper loss, and go ahead and give us better thermal efficiency and higher power output capabilities. Now, in addition to that, you're going to see all these capacitors that we have on here, and one little touchstone that we want to see if we can maybe show you is that these capacitors, we'll see if we can get you to see it right there. You might be able to notice the text on the capacitor, but it says FP5K. Yep, you can see right there, and that's important because that means that those actual capacitors are 5K rated. Now, normal capacitors on most motherboards are only rated for 2K operation. This is twice the lifespan of a normal type of capacitor. So when you pair that together with the high performance MOSFETs that we're utilizing, these fully molded alloy based inductors, and then you got these high performance capacitors on there, you've got a really great quality VRM design, which is giving you a great deal of efficiency and performance. Now, another really critical part to our AMD series motherboard designs, which we really have kind of been the leaders in, has been implementing our digital power design. So you can see right here we've got this DigiPlus chip. So that little PWM chip allows us to have really extensive tweaking and tuning controls within our UEFI and within the operating system. Now we feature not only digital power for the actual CPU, but over here on the DRAM side, there's also going to be a Digi Plus chip here as well. And you can maybe faintly see the little writing there. And so that's a digital controller, and this is a digital controller. So we have digital power delivery and control for the memory, and digital power delivery and control for our CPU. And what does that ultimately translate into? Well, in the real world, that gives you a huge degree of control inside the UEFI for things like multi-stage load line calibration, OCP control, transient response, phase management response policies, and we'll talk definitely a bit more about that when we release our actual overclocking guide for the FX-based platform. But really, it gives you an unparalleled level of control and tuning parameters that are very high quality and being tuned with the architecture and the platform, and it's really the best type of power delivery solution on the market. This is not only why we've been really forebearers at putting it not only on our AMD and our Intel-based platforms, but us really doing it before anybody else when it came to the AMD platform. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that along with this total design, it's not just the components that make the difference. Things like the actual trace layout and the topology and even the UEFI, which has really been really carefully tuned with this board. I think it's over 15 UEFI updates that it's released to consistently get tuning and performance enhancements to really give it a great deal of auto rule flexibility, which is going to give you guys a great overclocking experience. So overall, you can see that we've got those great premium quality components and that digital power control. So next up, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the actual I/O for this motherboard. Okay guys, so here taking a look at the back of the board, pretty straightforward. We've got a PS2 port and another PS2 port, so for your keyboard and mouse. That's great for you guys that are still rocking those legacy keyboards. We've got, of course, a Toslink optical output. We've got two USB 3 ports, which paired with the also front USB 3 gives us a total of 4. And keep in mind that these USB 3 ports fully support our USB 3 boost technology to go ahead and give you faster performance for your storage-based devices. Now, in addition to that, right below, we've got two more USB 2 ports, two more USB 2 ports, and below that we have an eSATA port. That is a non-powered eSATA, and then we have two more USB 2 ports and then two more USB 2 ports. So in total, you've got a great deal of connectivity when it comes to USB. Now, for USB, we also feature our AI charger technology, which means you can go ahead and quick charge iOS-based devices such as an iPad and iPhone, things along those lines, and be able to go ahead and do it more quickly than you would normally. Now from there, of course, we also have a gigabit Ethernet built onto the board by a Realtek 8111 based gigabit Ethernet controller. Now this will also come with our network iControl software, which is great for being able to do some quick network-centric prioritization if you want to go ahead and prioritize, let's say, your web browser, your Hulu Plus client, or Steam, or whatever other application you might want to be able to maintain consistent performance while maybe you have other network-centric services running. You can go ahead and do that as well. And then directly below that, of course, we have our analog audio output for our Realtek 892 audio processing chip. But overall, you've got a huge deal of connectivity available to you here on this board, so you're going to be covered, whether it's going to be USB, whether it's going to be USB 3 eSATA, or whether it's going to even be, of course, a serial AT on the internal connectivity for the board. You are all good to go in terms of having all the latest connections. So with that, let's go ahead and keep moving this along. Okay guys, so next up, if you remember, we talked about this actual little button over here, which was our USB BIOS flashback button. Well, the USB BIOS flashback button works in conjunction with actually the one of the USB ports here on the back of the motherboard, and you just want to reference your manual for it. But the way it would work is you take the flash drive with the corresponding UEFI, or the BIOS file, as some people still call it. When you insert that in there, you hold down this button, and what it will do is it will directly go ahead and update the UEFI directly. This is great in the event that you have a surge, spike, sag, power out, something that can potentially corrupt this actual little chip right here, which is the ROM, or essentially your UEFI. And if that were to occur and the system doesn't post or power on, you can go ahead and use that mechanism to go ahead and recover it and get you back up and running. Now, another attention to detail is going to be the fact that you can see this chip is not soldered on. It is actually a removable chip, and we do that because it gives you the most flexibility and be able to have the least amount of downtime. Now, we've got the great advanced technologies like the USB BIOS flashback, which no other competitor is going to offer, But in the event that maybe something catastrophic happened and you couldn't even use the USB BIOS flashback, you could still contact our service support department and we could send you out a replacement chip. You pull that out, you drop it in there, and you're good to go. Other competitors on the marketplace, a lot of them are using solder-based designs, which means this is physically soldered to the motherboard like another chip that you would have that's just been implemented directly onto the motherboard. Disadvantage is if that chip fails, even if they have a quote-unquote dual BIOS design or something along those lines, if it doesn't make sure to roll over to the second chip, which actually can happen, you're stuck and you still have to send your board in for service. Well, on our design implementation, you could either get this removed, pop in the new one, or use our hardware-based USB BIOS flashback implementation that we talked about here, allowing you to go ahead and get your system back up and running. So that's a great feature that you have there. Now, moving back, there's another option that we did not talk about here with the actual network and the USB ports in terms of offering compatibility for some special functions, including our remote go as well as our NFC box. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay guys, so we just finished looking at the back I/O there, and we were talking about NFC Express, and as you can see right here, I've got the NFC box itself right here. Now the great thing about this is this not only gives you the ability to have NFC support on the motherboard, but also includes a USB 3 hub built into it. So you can see right there you've got two ports. There's an included cable to go ahead and connect to one of the back USB 3 ports, and you're good to go. So with that, you can go ahead and take your NFC enabled device such as a smartphone or a tablet, or even the included NFC fob. You can pass directly over it, and you can do things like transferring photos from, let's say, your smartphone or your tablet, to go ahead and initiating quick commands where you can launch 10 applications at a swipe of the actual NFC box, to even be able to go ahead and log into your system. If you're interested in seeing the NFC Express in action, make sure to check out the video that we went ahead and released on the NFC box. It's actually a pretty cool little piece of hardware that is supported on our motherboards that's been updated for this M5A99FX. Now, in addition to that, there's also the full AI Suite Software 2 package. Now, software suites, a lot of times necessarily you might think that it's bloatware, it's not necessarily valuable, and I think with AI Suite 2 we definitely challenge that convention. Not only does it feature advanced functions like we talked about, like our fan tuning controls with Fan Expert, where you have the ability to go ahead and do customized curves to the fan headers and be able to define your type of fan setup configuration, as well as being able to target in your responsive property curves for temperature in relation to how fast your fan is ramping up and the corresponding RPM metrics for that fan, to other aspects like our USB 3 boost, which will allow you to go ahead and take a flash drive, connect it, or let's say a high-speed external flash storage-based device, and considerably improve its performance by switching the operating protocol from BOT to Turbo to even UASP for the absolute fastest in performance. You also have other things like Network Eye Control, which is a great application which works with the network controller to be able to go ahead and adjust network-centric services and the priority that you're running at. So let's say if maybe you're downloading, but you're maybe watching something on YouTube or Hulu, or you're streaming it through another application, you want to prioritize your stream versus your download and not have an impact, you can do that through Network Eye Control. We even have a cool media streaming application called Remote Go, which will allow you to remotely initialize different types of functions from the motherboard out to another Play2Go enabled device, which is generally supported through the Windows operating system. So there's some really cool stuff that's in there, and of course classic stuff that you would expect, whether it's PC Pro for monitoring your system, or of course our Turbo V and Digi Plus VRM options, which allow you to tweak and tune pretty much all the same type of aspects that you would have traditionally available to you only within the UEFI, but you can do easily from within the actual operating system environment. So I definitely recommend check out the application and see the level of flexibility and control that you have available to you. And one of the really best options for you guys out there that would truly want to customize your system utility experiences is that it's an actual module application, meaning you can go ahead and selectively pick which applications within AI Suite you want to actively load. And if you don't want those programs, you can go ahead and uncheck them. They'll unload from the actual AI Suite system utility. But if you ever want them, you don't have to go back and re-download them. You can just go back into the settings of the application, re-enable them, they'll load back up, and you're good to go. So definitely something that we feel that adds not only a full value experience to your system, but it's also not just a piece of software. It actually has to work with hardware-based implementations that we have on the motherboard. So it's really a mix of firmware, hardware, and software base that you're going to get within that system utility. So let's go ahead and give you guys a little bit of an outlier relative to the performance expectation and overclocking that you're going to have with this board. Okay guys, so when it comes to overclocking, what's the experience you can have on an M5A99FX Pro 2.0? In one word, outstanding. The overclocking consistency you're going to have on this board is really like the rest of our M5A series. With that high quality VRM that we have and that digital power control delivery that we have, it really makes an easy process of overclocking an FX-based CPU. In most situations, users are going to just have to enable probably between about 5 to 6 options within the UEFI, and depending on, of course, on your cooling solution and the margin in your CPU, you're going to be rocking and rolling and comfortably hitting, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, even 5 gigahertz. I've personally gone ahead and overclocked about 6 different samples of 8350s, with varying levels due to the CPU. But I've had no issues on pretty much every sample hitting 4.6 gigahertz. My best samples, one of them hits 5 gigahertz and 2 other ones hit 4.8 without any issues, and the rest were at 4.7. In terms of the DRAM divider performance, we're continuing to really lead in that regard. So whether you're looking at, 2 4 gig DIMMs, whether you're looking at 2 8 gig DIMMs, whether you're looking at 4 gig DIMMs, this board has excellent memory compatibility and interoperability, and DRAM overclocking is fantastic. Now, some of you guys, of course, on the AMD platform tend to try lower frequency oriented memory kits, so usually targeting 1600, maybe 1866. My preference generally is to probably target a little bit closer to 2133, but 1600 kits work without definitely any issues. But in terms of the overall compatibility and interoperability, it's been outstanding on the board. And in terms of the overclocking consistency, no issues for you guys that wanted to be able to crank this up a bit more to about 2133, 2400. We've definitely done in our testing even far higher than that, but for Vishera, in terms of the memory controller, especially when considering the fact that XMP memory kits are really tuned for the Intel memory architecture, you are better off, like I said, at those higher frequencies, really making sure that that kit either meets a QVL recommendation standard or is an AMP-based memory kit. That being said, I've had very good luck in terms of running multiple 2133 XMP kits and 2400 memory kits on this board. But keep in mind that the memory divider support really varies between the Vishera memory controller that's built in. So some can comfortably hit higher frequencies than others. And there's also always the reality that simultaneous overclocking of the DRAM in unison with the CPU can actually affect each other. So sometimes you could have a 4.8 gigahertz capable CPU, and the memory controller could be capable of doing 2400, but they can't do it at the same time. And maybe the best they might be able to do at the same time is 4.6 at 2133. And that really will vary between your CPU. The great thing about it, though, is we offer a really extensive level of tuning parameters within the UEFI to be able to go ahead and dial this in to be able to get the most that you can possibly out of the platform. So overall, when it comes to an overclocking experience of the board, you're going to get a stable, reliable, great experience that's easy to be able to tune and configure. Now, for you guys that are looking for something a little bit more basic, you're maybe looking for some simplified overclocking options, the board definitely has that available to you through either our auto tuning technology, which is built within the operating system that you can go ahead and click a button for the auto tuning function to go ahead and dynamically overclock your CPU, or to use one of our quick profile options within the UEFI to overclock the CPU. If you're just looking to get a little bit more performance, like that 4+ gigahertz marker, you can easily go ahead and click one of those options and you are good to go. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap things up. Okay guys, so wrapping things up, we've talked a lot about the M5A Pro 990FX R2.0, and pretty much as you guys can see, it covers you in every single respect. If you're looking to build an enthusiast AMD oriented system, you have a focus at wanting to be able to have a lot of expansion, you want a lot of connectivity, you're looking to be able to overclock the platform, whether it's an FX 6000, 8000, or 9000 series CPU, this board's going to get taken care of. That high quality attention to detail that we put into the trace, the topology, and the layout of the board to really be able to give you outstanding performance, interoperability, and compatibility, it's there. You've got that digital power design for the CPU, for the DRAM, high quality premium components for the VRM assembly, whether it's those alloy fully molded inductors, they're thermally more efficient, high power output capabilities. You got those 5K rated capacitors. Of course, you got those high performance MOSFETs. You got a sintered heat pipe with a nice high performance VRM heatsink. You stack that all up with all the great connections that the board has to offer and all the features that we've talked about, and you've really got a great board for you guys that are looking to build a solid, enthusiast oriented system. Definitely not to undervalue, like I said, the things that are behind the scenes, whether it's keep in mind that not all boards that just because they have fan headers mean that they have solid fan controls, or whether or not they all all have UEFI, whether they're putting in the actual commitment to be able to fine-tune that UEFI and give you better compatibility, interoperability, and performance. And especially amongst sometimes other vendors where they're releasing multiple versions of the same board over time, so you sometimes design changes need to occur to be able to improve performance, compatibility, things like that. You know, since we released the R2.0 series, which was specifically designed from the ground up for Vishera series CPUs, we've only released one version, and we've just continually supported to be able to give you guys the best experience possible. We think that shows you the commitment that you get when you get an ASUS series board and you're pairing it up with an FX-based series CPU. As always, if you guys found the information interesting and relevant, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or feedback, drop it here on the YouTube page, and I'll do my best to go ahead and get back to you when I can. You can also feel free to go ahead and check out the PCDIY website. That's pcdiy.asus.com. There's also an email address to go along with it. That's pcdiy@asus.com. And if you have any feedback on content you'd like to see, feel free to go ahead and drop it there. I might also maybe have some write-up information on this board there, but probably first and foremost will be a focused guide on FX-based overclocking as a whole that will be for our AMD 900 series motherboards, whether it's the 970, 990X, or 990FX based chipset. You'll see popping up here on the YouTube channel as well as on the website. Now, if you guys watched the entire video, as always, I sincerely appreciate it. If you can, thumbs up, favorite, like it, share it, subscribe. As always, that stuff is appreciated and helps us to keep making sure that the content is coming out to you as much as possible. So with that, as always, take care, take it easy, and enjoy the rest of your day.